Hey, what is up everyone? Killrian here bringing you another video, and I know it's been a while since I uploaded, but I've been recently enjoying Lost Ark, as I'm sure many of you have, and this will actually be my first Lost Ark video. But for Lost Ark, I decided to main a Scrapper, one of the female martial artists, and with this video, what I wanted to address is the PvP build of a Scrapper. Now, pretty much all Scrappers utilize the same PvP build. For the most part, it's the most consistent and provides you a decent amount of burst, but a good amount of like engagement and everything like that. So whenever you are looking to PvP, it's going to require you to set up your Book of Coordination. PvP in this game is Equalized, and so whenever you click the Coliseum here and then go to Book of Coordination, this is what you're going to come up with or find out. Now, pretty much every or majority of DPS in the game run a full 750 swiftness, and then I personally like to go with specialization as the secondary, because this is where a lot of your burst damage comes from, is with the Scrapper. A majority of your damage comes from these specific skills, which are your shock related skills, and specialization increases that damage. Now, going through your skills, just kind of one by one, we're going to be looking at Charging Blow. Now, Charging Blow is your bread and butter engaged skill as a whole. I have this bound to my Q, and the two things that you're going to spec into are 8 points into this, allowing you to go down to the second tripod, which excellent mobility, which this basically increases the distance you're able to travel with the skill, which is your catch, as well as your destroyer. Now, destroyer, the primary reason why is because it's a slam down into the ground, which knocks the enemies up, which forces them to do the knockdown and in turn possibly utilize their roll skill or escape skill. Next up is going to be Fierce Tiger Strike. I personally am on my W. Fierce Tiger Strike is a knock-up. It is a very, very close range type skill, which the main thing is you want to make sure to have the amplified damage, because whenever you are comboing somebody, this allows you to be dealing more damage, but also any of your teammates to be dealing increased damage onto your target. So this is a pretty huge deal. Now, in my opinion, there are two avenues with Fierce Tiger Strike that you can go. One is Pounce, which is a just very, very short range dash. Basically kind of allows you to more guarantee that the skill lands a little bit more often with the advancement. But I have actually opted personally to go for Focus, which is a shock gain increase, making sure that whenever I am executing certain skills or trying to build shock like off in a corner or whatever it may be, this is a really good way of essentially more consistently building shock. Next up, we're going to be looking at Instant Hit, which is on my E skill here. This is a very, very important skill because it is your only like tier 3 CC for the most part, which is a stun. So with Instant Hit, I personally spec for the wide hit, making it a little bit more consistent in terms of actually being able to land the skill. And then there's two avenues here with the second tripod. Precision, which increases the stun duration. This is pretty important if you are trying to utilize it to combo into itself, or going with Dangerous Contract. So this is a little bit more consistent. Precision is a little bit more consistent in my opinion, because it lets you kind of guarantee things a lot more effectively, especially things like your ulti, or Dangerous Contract if you know that you're going to be peeling very actively. This is good against things like Berserkers, good against Artillerists, classes that are very, very reliant on doing a long term like super armor engage type of a deal. Then this allows you to peel for your team a lot more effectively. And then lastly, Tracking Instinct, which is a 4-meter kind of dash forward with the attack as well. Very, very important in my opinion, because this is a skill you do not want to miss, and it can be utilized as a good like following tool as well. Now, next up, we're going to be looking at Roundup Sweep. Roundup Sweep, it is very important for you to spec into a specific style. You can go with something like the blood. I personally enjoy blood hunger because it applies a bleed, and I don't know how many times I've had people escape from me with like 1% health, and this ends up finishing them off. A lot of people do enjoy going with the single hit option as well. Both, in my opinion, are pretty consistent, but I use this skill a lot of times as a poke skill, and so I personally like blood hunger a lot more. But outside of that, you're going to want to make sure that you have the circumstantial judgment, which is once again, all about movement, all about moving forward. Circumstantial judgment, increasing the damage and applying a rush forward. And then next up is going to be reinforced hit. Now, reinforced hit, you absolutely have to spec into, because that turns this skill into a like long range, fast acting skill that you can utilize in PvP. And it is a stagger as well, so you can utilize it as a catch mechanic as well. Next up, so let me actually address this first. My top line skills here are a lot of the skills that I am very actively utilizing, as in the form of like movement or poke or things along those lines. And then my second row skills are a lot more of the damage dealing, like heavy hitter, really important skills for me to actually end up landing, outside of instant strike or instant hit, I would say. Next up is going to be Dragon Advent. This is your leaping skill. Big thing about the class as a whole is our class is built around chasing, in my opinion. Your goal as a scrapper as a whole is to basically engage onto a target that you don't want casting or being very active. This is your bards, your paladins, your sorceresses, really any ranged characters outside of gunslingers. They kind of cuck you to some degree, but this is your like dash skill or a jump skill. And with that in mind, as we can see, the first tripod you spec into is going to be excellent mobility. Next up is tenacity, because you will hate to be just randomly staggered as you're jumping out of the air from a guy, throwing a random skill out, essentially. So this is a pretty core thing to prevent you from getting interrupted in that sense. And then lastly is going to be Great Destruction. So this skill in and of itself is utilized to combo into a lot of the times, or follow people and to begin a combo, and it is a really good shock generator as a whole. So whenever you like land that secondary catch and you combo it with Dragon Advent, because it is a knock up as well, just having like the single target damage, having it build shock allows you to do a really strong finisher with Death Rattle, which we'll talk about in a second. Next up is going to be your True Rising Fist. Now, this is one of your shock skills. It is a two-pronged attack where you do an upward kind of uppercut and then a downward smash. It is very, very important that you spec into Lightning Fist on the first row here. The reason why is because it changes and actually increases the speed of the initial animation, making it a much faster catch skill as well, compared to its like regular animation. Next up, I would say go with Air Raid as a whole, because if hitting pushed foe, so in other words, whenever you do knock somebody up, you're getting also a 60% defense ignore alongside it. So this just adds damage onto it. And then lastly, you're going to be looking at Dragon's Fury, which as a whole, you can either go with either or, in my opinion. Actually, with Dragon's Fury, it's a downward strike where the damage itself is increased, but also the AoE is increased, so it's good at randomly catching other players. Or if you are going very, very focused around assassinating people, the Bursting Fist. Most people, I would say, actually utilize the Bursting Fist. It depends on if I am going up against a whole bunch of second, sorry about that. It depends if I'm going up against a whole bunch of like melee groups and whatnot, because this additional radius can also basically CC them, because it is a knockdown as well. Sorry about that Steam call there. Let's see. And now Chains of Destruction. Chain Destruction Fist. I don't know, I always keep calling it Chains of Destruction. But Chain Destruction Fist. This is a really, really important thing. This is a really important thing as a whole, because the way that this ends up working is it is a super armor whenever you have it spec'd into the second prong here of Tenacity. And it is a very, very long animation whenever you spec into Endless Rage. So Endless Rage, Tenacity into Great Explosion. This is super important whenever you are fighting against like things like gunslingers or really any kind of melee that you know are trying to engage. Because it's such a long animation, this will basically stagger catch them even whenever they are trying to super armor trade with you and protect themselves. Alongside with Great Explosion being this massive like slam, it actually is a higher tier of CC with the knockup, and basically can pull people out of some of their protected skills as well. So specking Endless Rage, Tenacity, Great Explosion, and really learning how to counter other classes with Chain Destruction Fist is probably one of the most important things that you can learn, in my opinion, to be a successful scrapper, outside of learning to tech chase people. Lastly, we're going to be looking at Death Rattle. Death Rattle is kind of your bread and butter as far as an execute skill. It is the highest damage shock skill that a scrapper has, and this is one of those skills where a good scrapper will pull these off quite often, and a bad scrapper will basically never pull these off because it's a pretty tricky skill because it has a bit of a wind-up animation, and a lot of times this is something that people are looking out for, or whenever they start seeing their teammates getting CC'd or scrapped down by a scrapper. Death Rattle, you want to spec into True Sight with the attack speed increase. This just limits the amount of time that you're stuck in animation doing this very long animation skill. Now, second row, you have a bit of an option. In my opinion, I've kind of been teetering back and forth between these two. Single hit is, on a single target, you're getting 30% more damage. This skill can hit very, very hard. Like if you're if you're on max scratch or shock or whatever it may be, then usually it hits for around, I'd say 35 to 40k in PvP. So a very, very hard hitting skill. But the problem is because it's a long animation, it is very easy to interrupt. And so most of the time people go Tenacity on this. Really depends on your play style and how you're managing it. Generally, I would say Tenacity is best like 80% of the time, but I've been playing around with single hit a little bit recently. So it all depends on like how comfortable you are in trading off having that additional super armor by specking out of Tenacity. And then lastly, Shock Explosion. This basically just increases the amount of damage that is dealt in accordance to the amount of shock you use. And so it is rather important, in my opinion, to maximize your shock. So using this as a finisher skill after something like your Dragon Advent or something like that, because otherwise you're just nerfing your overall damage, and this just increases it as a whole. But with this build as a whole, I would say that this is fairly standard for pretty much all scrappers. There are those tiny nuances that you can spec into, like going for the advance here, going for the less stun duration on your instant hit, or going for something like the single target versus Tenacity on your Death Rattle. Hopefully this was I know, probably longer than expected. Actually, yeah, 15 minutes, God. Video of a recording, but I just wanted this to be the first video that I uploaded for Lost Ark. Hopefully y'all can catch me on my stream, twitch.tv/Killerian. Y'all see the cat's name is Chat. And yeah, I hope to see y'all in the rated PvP come next week. Adios, everybody. Thanks for watching.